Everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hormone Genius podcast. Today, we have the privilege of interviewing Julie Grunklee. Julie is a registered nurse and national board certified health and wellness coach. She holds a master's degree in community health education, is a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a child of God. Julie learned firsthand just how important hormones are to a woman's health after she had a total hysterectomy at the age of 33. In her own journey to find better health, combining her scientific nursing and health educator background with her faith, Julie discovered how God actually designed our bodies as well as what we can do to help it function at its best. So, Julie, we're so excited to have you on our podcast today. We know there are a lot of women who listen, and we're blessed that there's a broad spectrum of age of women. Our audience is very vast. So this is really targeted to all women, but specifically women in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. And so if you're in your 40s, 50s, or beyond, or even younger, this is going to be very helpful information. So Julie, why don't you start off just sharing a little bit more about yourself and then how you got interested in this topic of women's health?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie and Teresa. It's an honor to be here on the Hormone Genius podcast. When I was, as a registered nurse, I became a registered nurse in my early 20s. And, you're taught, anatomy and physiology, and, you get some sex ed in high school and junior high and that kind of stuff. But we were never really taught how our bodies function at their best. And I remember back in my late 20s, I was having horrible periods, awful PMS, and that's when they were starting to prescribe Prozac for the week before your period for the awful PMS. And it worked for a while, and then it didn't work. And then I finally ended up doing nothing for a while, and then it was really bad. And then I was on depot for about a year, and I went in for my annual, and I said, and he's like, and my doctor was like, well, how's it going? And I said, if you wanted to take the whole thing out, I'd be okay with that. Come to find out, I had adenomyosis, which is basically fibroids and abnormal tissue in the muscle lining of the uterus, and both ovaries were full of cysts. And I also had cervical dysplasia. So my hormones were not functioning well. Had the hysterectomy, it fixed a lot of that stuff, but then a whole other spectrum of health issues cropped up. Food allergies, environmental allergies, chemical sensitivities, brain fog, candida overgrowth, just a ton of other abnormalities. And in my search to find answers for that, no, I couldn't find answers for that. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. And then I finally started putting that information together, found a team of allergists in La Crosse, Wisconsin, ones that think outside the box, and started putting some pieces together. And I'm like, wow, God really designed our bodies amazingly. And to function in cycles, we should have some ebb and flow in things, but we need progesterone. We need estrogen. And when our bodies, when we're under a lot of stress, those things are suppressed. And especially in our menopausal years. And there's a lot of doctors out there that don't feel progesterone is needed in a menopausal woman if she doesn't have a uterus. I'm here to tell you, oh, yes, it is. We have to have it. Progesterone is needed for, it's kind of like our antihistamine, our natural antihistamine. It helps to calm us. It helps to prevent those awful allergic reactions. A lot of women find themselves having a lot of allergies in their menopausal years because of low progesterone. And progesterone is the precursor, as I found out, to cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. So when we're under a lot of stress, then our cortisol levels go high and our progesterone drops because our body uses all of our progesterone to make cortisol to deal with all the stress. So putting all these pieces together, I realized our hormones are like towards that root cause of a lot of health issues in our life, especially those high cortisol levels, because the body prioritizes responding to that stress, and then everything else falls apart. Thyroid, digestion, all the things. Yeah, so it's kind of, I've been on this journey over the last 15 years or so to try and put these pieces together, and then to teach women. I was kind of done treating symptoms with pills as a nurse. And when I went back to school about 7 years ago, and after I graduated 4 years ago with my master's degree, I decided I'm done. Yes, pills have their place, and I do take bioidentical hormones to help support my body. But there's also so many other things we can do, especially women in going through perimenopause and menopause, such as, I could take this from a Christian perspective, praying often. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. So connecting to our Lord and praying often to de-stress and to bring peace to our bodies is a big one. Experiencing that joy, which is a fruit of the Holy Spirit. Eating well. Our bodies were designed to eat real whole food, not all the sugar and processed foods that are out there. And then to move our bodies. Our bodies were designed to move. And it's not a 1, 2, 3 approach, but it's more of helping women listen to their bodies and figuring out what works best for them.
Let's stop right there, because you've laid out so much that we can kind of talk about. And obviously you have 3 main principles that you just set up for us to really dig in and dive into. But I want to go back to just that 30-some-year-old self. And, you were listening to your body, but yet there was no answers really for health in that moment. And this is a struggle for a lot of women. And you went through something called surgical menopause, basically. So you went through a dramatic change in your hormones that was unnatural. And a lot of women that I've met through the years as patients have had that situation happen. And, that's different than natural menopause.
Right.
To some degree, but you'll experience some of the same symptoms as natural menopause, but it's such an abrupt shutoff. And I think in those situations, and in particular, what happened to you is that was a traumatic point in your health that it didn't cause all those other things to happen necessarily. They were there. There was a root kind of there, but it also unleashed some of those things. Because, and like you explained, because there's such a balance to our hormones and the ebbs and flows, and the hormones control our immune system. And so we forget that, right? But they control our immune system in so many ways. They modulate what is happy and not happy in our immune system. So you stopped your hormones in that moment with the surgery. So it upset basically the apple cart and let loose a lot of things that were already there, like I said. But explain to us, because that's such a difficult position to be in. And I just emotionally, I really empathize with, being that desperate to, find answers, but to have have all those bad things stop, to have those symptoms stop. What was the emotional experience and the physical experience around basically going through that surgery and surgical menopause?
At the time, it was like I was overjoyed because those symptoms stopped. I would gain 10 pounds and lose 10 pounds within a month. I had to have 2 different sizes of clothes in my closet. I had heavy, heavy, heavy periods with a lot of cramping, a lot of pain. I would get 3-day migraines, horrible breast tenderness. And at the time it was like, yay, I was so excited. But yeah, when those other symptoms started cropping up a couple of years later, I'm like, what on earth is going on? But it wasn't until probably 3 or 4 years ago that I finally started putting the pieces together. That was my hormones. And so I think that's when it really hit me emotionally of what I lost. I lost the opportunity because I didn't know any better. I lost the opportunity to fix it with other things, with lowering my stress, with eating more real whole foods, with moving my body according to how my body needed to move, maybe using really, what I want to say, pinpoint targeted bioidentical hormones to balance things out. That's, if I tell people, if I would have known then what I know now, I would still have my ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
I would still have my uterus. And I don't think I would have near the health issues that I have today.
Mm-hmm. Julie, this is such a powerful story. And I could just think of a handful of women I know in my own personal life who have a very similar story, a total hysterectomy in their early 30s. And so, like, as we're discussing this, and as those of you who may be listening, may be struggling so terribly, you have your ovaries, you have your uterus, but you just, earlier episodes we called like the period the red devil. We talked about that. Like, you hate it. It is terrible, right? So Julie, what would you say, what would you recommend these women do? They're considering maybe a total hysterectomy. If they're not, they're just trying to deal with it. What are some, and I know you just gave a few, but what are, let's dig in there, just spend a few minutes. What is their next step?
I think their next step is finding a healthcare provider, such as Teresa, such as my physician, Dr. Cheryl Hansel, or Dr. Pranger in Waterloo, or someone who is trained in NAPRO technology or is open to thinking outside the box and walking with you on this journey to find other ways other than just, here's a pill, or let's just axe it out. That's, I think, one of the first steps. De-stressing, finding ways to de-stress that work for you. And I don't have a 1, 2, 3 step approach. As a coach, I know, I've had a lot of people tell me, well, you need to go like vegetarian or vegan. Well, my body doesn't like grains. My body doesn't like legumes. It doesn't like eggs. It doesn't like dairy. So how am I going to get my protein? It likes pork. It likes turkey. So finding ways to de-stress, finding ways to eat real whole food, and keeping that record, what I like to call a record keeping journal, which is very similar to, fertility tracking. You can do it right along with that fertility tracking, keeping track of your symptoms, keeping track of what, your basal body temperature, your cervical mucus, and other symptoms that your body is giving you, but also with your food choices, your body movement, your sleep habits, your stress level. And it doesn't have to take a long time every day, just a few minutes just to jot things down. That's really helpful. But like I said, yeah, eating real whole food, and then finding body movement that works for you. For some people that might be high intensity interval training. When I started losing my hair 4 years ago, I started digging into it more. And that's when I really dug into the hormone piece of it. And that high intensity aerobics and interval training like that can just make things worse. So getting back to, okay, maybe slow walking or yin type yoga or stretching. Plantar fasciitis is a huge issue for a lot of women in, my age group. And so finding those things that don't aggravate that, like biking or the yoga or slow walking or things like that. Making sure you're getting enough sleep. Women in our age group were pulled in so many different directions. Like I said, I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a grandma. I've got aging parents, aging in-laws, and I have a full-time job. I volunteer. We're pulled in all these different directions. And I think sometimes young moms might get that support when they're pulled in so many different directions. But women in our age group, not necessarily. Well, I think, well, your kids are out of the house, you're empty nesters, you got all this time, so making sure sleep is a priority, and self-care in general, whether that's journaling. I do a lot of journaling. I'm a huge proponent of journaling, and that helps to tap into your inner self, and it can help tap into your intuition as well. And then, the praying often, I think, is a good one too. And sometimes we have to, our racing minds, need to quiet down to tap into God. And I have started creating guided meditations. that are scripture based, because a lot of Christian women are like, yeah, but I get in this and it's more new age stuff and I really don't want to listen to it. So I've started putting together guided meditations, and I have with my online programs, especially, they're full of guided meditations, and they're short, 5 to 7 minutes. Some of them are longer, but mostly the short ones because we don't have the time.
I was just talking to a woman yesterday as a patient, and she was going through a tremendous amount of stress, a lot of new health issues coming up, and I could just sense, and she's menopausal, and just the stress and what was going on. Women are just so good at mind racing, like at 1,000, and they're not really solving anything. They just keep going over and over in their head. We do this at night we've all done it. We wake up in the middle of the night and all of a sudden you fixate on something. And it's like, you just ruminate on one thing. And it's, I've done it so many times, and it generally happens when I'm premenstrual. So there's a hormone aspect to it as well. And by the time you woke up, you're like, I spent probably 2 hours just thinking about that one thing. And I didn't solve anything. I just wasted my sleep. It's just, and so the writing down, I think, is really important. Like for some women, keeping a journal, notebook, whatever, piece of paper next to your bed, so that you can just write it down right away, so that you can kind of like give it a closure immediately.
Get it out
is really important. And just knowing that, okay, I can't solve this tonight, maybe I'll solve it tomorrow, I think is really important. And the sleep is so important. I think for women who are mothers, who spent years not sleeping, and, I had 8 children, so I spent years not getting quality sleep. But I tell you what, I am making up for it by I am way making up for it. My husband will joke. He's like, do you realize you slept probably close to 12 hours? And I'm like, really? I'm like, that was great. I'm like, I just am such a believer now that sleep is a reset. And we know, like in the brain, the lymphatic, we call it the glymphatic system in the brain, detoxes as you sleep. But it is just, I wake up every day now, praise God, my children are older and they sleep. I wake up and I'm just like I literally grateful every morning to God. Thank you for that night's sleep, because I feel so good. So if you're struggling with sleep, that's something that you really got to find an answer to. And there's things that can help, and, the eat and the pray and the move, it all, helps promote better sleep. But sometimes you need extra help too.
And progesterone, the bioidentical progesterone, really has helped me with that aspect, as well as, not necessarily the guided meditation, but just a mantra, Jesus, I love you. I love you, Jesus, I praise you, Jesus, I thank you. Just that mantra that I can run through my brain. But progesterone and some extra melatonin at times can really help that. And then, the blue light filters, making sure you're not taking your screens to bed, or if you are, having that blue light filter so that blue light's not coming into your eyes at night, has helped a lot. And just the bedtime routine, we talk about that with our kids, having that bedtime routine to help relax them and everything. Well, we need that too. Yeah.
And don't you think, Julie, too, this was not due to perimenopause in myself, like 10 years ago when I suffered with insomnia and I just could not sleep. But for me, it wasn't just the activity before bed, it's the whole day. So even thinking through, if there is a stressor, that throughout the day we try to stay calm. And this is any age, but specifically, women in their 40s, 50s and beyond. Like if we're sensing tension during the day out of stress, that doesn't just happen to go away because we want it to before bed, so thinking about that too. And for us, like we diffuse oils and we breathe deeply, calm, if there's something that's causing stress throughout the day.
Yeah.
Huge piece of it.
Yeah. And that's where like my guided meditations come into play. I tell my clients, or suggest to my clients, it's up to them what they want to do, but to hand that over to God, in any way, shape, or form. Some people write it down and rip it up. Some people write it down and throw it in a bonfire. Some people write it down and put it in a prayer box. Other people just pray and say, Jesus, take this yoke from me, and let me, thy will be done. But I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm letting you worry about it. But then that I have a guided meditation that's called Afternoon Walk with Jesus. And the start of my guided meditations are about 2 to 3 minutes of just deep breathing and a progressive body relaxation, and letting that tension go, so you can disengage the fight or flight freeze response. Disengage the sympathetic nervous system and engage the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest stage where our body functions at its best. And then putting in those scripture verses and putting in those positive things to help guide them into this place of relaxation. And this afternoon walk with Jesus is walking along the beach and hand it in over to him, saying, here, take it. And he gladly will. We just have to give him the opportunity to and ask him to. But that's a really good time, I think, that before supper time or dinner, whatever you happen to call it, your evening meal, to do that between that work, those transition periods. So you don't take it home to your family, or take it home to your spouse or your community activity that you're doing later in the evening. Transition into that home time, so your home can be that place of relaxation.
Julie, we talked about this in an earlier episode. Just to our listeners, find the Q&A with Teresa about perimenopause. I mean, we really dig into a lot of the stuff, but I'm going to ask some of those questions again, because it doesn't hurt for people to hear that again. Absolutely. So Julie, give a little overview of what women can expect. How do women know that they're approaching menopause, and how do women know that they've reached menopause?
So approaching menopause, perimenopause literally means around menopause. And menopause literally means stopping menses, stopping, the period has stopped. And that is when you have reached menopause when you have not had a period for 12 months. So 1 full year, no menstrual flow. And that perimenopausal time can be sometimes 10 years beforehand it can start. And it starts with kind of the irregular periods. Sometimes they're a little shorter together. Sometimes they're a little further apart. Some women will experience hot flashes, especially when they're under a lot of stress, or night sweats. And that's the fluctuation in hormones. Some women will experience a little bit of a deeper voice or drier mucous membranes at times due to the lack of estrogen in the body. For a lot of women, some women will experience a little bit of insomnia, especially if they're under a lot of stress. But it is that fluctuating, it's the lowering of those hormones. And, some women just go through it beautifully. Their periods just start lengthening out a little bit, or maybe they skip an entire month. And then pretty soon they're skipping 3 or 4 months, or pretty soon they're just done. Like I know some women that have just gone regular normal cycles, and then they're just done. And it's beautiful.
Not always the same for every woman, but so that's the way we'd all like to see it happen. It's like, it could go like this, or it could go like this,
right?
And when it goes uncomfortably, and you can kind of ask your mother. I mean, so many things, like there's a genetic kind of propensity, but if your mother went through an easy transition to menopause, you might experience that too, or if it's vice versa and uncomfortable. And so when it's uncomfortable, you mentioned like the periods can get shorter. They can also get heavier too. And you can end up being so kind of imbalanced. And this has to do with, again, the symphony of our hormones, but it's ovulation, because this is all about ovulation. So when ovulation starts to become irregular, just like it was at the very beginning of our reproductive lifespan, the hormones are not balanced. And then that lining of our uterus gets confused. And when it gets confused, it can just decide it's going to bleed a lot and maybe a lot longer than expected.
Mhm.
So some women end up with hysterectomies because of the bleeding issues that occur, later on in life.
During perimenopause.
And,
Yeah.
they just don't know what else to do. And those are sometimes my favorite patients because, I can help them without birth control. We can get their hormones back in balance and sometimes just allow the body again to get to that place where they're going to be in that natural menopause again. So, Julie, one question I would like you to kind of start, talking about too, is a lot of women are, when you use the word bioidentical hormones, number one, people don't know what that word means. Number two, their doctors don't like that word. So, and they've heard a lot of things about hormones that are negative. I mean, we've been fed a lot of stuff that's negative around hormones. So what would you say to women, who are contemplating, desiring kind of hormone replacement and bioidentical hormone replacement, obviously sounding ideal? How do we kind of help them with the fears that have been created around all that?
Sure. And I'm I dive into science. There's not been a lot of studies with bioidenticals as far as random clinical control, double blind, placebo, all that stuff. Because bioidentical hormones are, number one, they're compounded. And that means a pharmacist mixes your specific dosage. And it's not necessarily the same as the next person. So it's targeted specifically to you, but it also connects to our cell receptors so much easier. And our body recognizes it as its own, as our body would make it. Whereas with synthetic hormones, there's a lot of side effects to that because the body recognizes it as a close enough, I'll take that, but it also has a lot of side effects that go along with it. And I don't think it's absorbed as well. I don't think it functions as well. I learned a long time ago, back in my 20s, that when my estrogen levels were high, I didn't feel good. So after my hysterectomy, I did not want to take estrogen because that was my only option, was the synthetics. That, and I'm factor V positive, which means it's a blood clotting issue, which means that I have a higher chance of a blood clot. And synthetic estrogens are known to cause some of those, and aggravate that. Bioidentical progesterone is also another one. I tried the conventional progestins and they don't work as well because it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The body might say it might fit and the body might say close enough, but it just doesn't function as well. Might it cost a little more money or insurance not pay for it? Sure. But there's no side effects.
So the way I like to describe it, Julie, is because it makes sense to me, is I think everybody went through some chemistry class, right? Mm-hmm. And we all kind of remember learning about water, H2O, and you would have your hydrogen and your oxygen molecules, and they show you how it looks, right? And it's like that little hexagonic structures. Well, everything has a structure to it, and hormones all have their own structure. So when a hormone is bioidentical, it just means that the chemical makeup of that medicine is exactly the same as the chemical makeup of what came out of the body. So like you said, it matches perfectly. Mm-hmm. Therefore, at the receptor site, it's like, oh, progesterone, I know you. And the side effects are only the side effects that can occur from what the actual hormone mechanisms that occur are. I would say this, Julie, you're right that bioidentical hormones are compounded, but it's a common misconception actually that we cannot get bioidentical hormones from a conventional pharmacy. And this is important because many women think, well, I couldn't afford bioidentical hormones, or maybe they're just I'm not comfortable because my doctor said, compounding pharmacies, just they're kind of not doing what they should, which is not true. But for whatever the reason is, you should know that bioidentical hormones are available at every pharmacy. And so when I talk to a menopausal woman, and frankly, anytime I use, hormones, I give them both options, because there are both options. You can get bioidentical from regular pharmacy. You can get it from a compounding pharmacy. I explain the differences to patients. What the difference is that the compounding pharmacy uses FDA approved ingredients. They make it in their lab. Instead of it be going to a big company and they make it there, they just make it in the pharmacy using the same ingredients that a big pharmaceutical company would use. They're FDA approved ingredients. But you're right, they can make it in dosages that are formulated more particular to meet the needs of a patient. They can use different routes, like transdermal to creams to troches to injection to capsules. So you have this wide variety of ability to work with that ingredient to make the hormone work for that patient. Traditional pharmacies carry less options, but they carry decent options. So for menopause, estradiol, estrogen, you can use a transdermal estrogen in a patch form that is available at every pharmacy, and it's completely bioidentical. So that's a safe, and a lot of times is an insurance covered option. Progesterone is available in every pharmacy across the country as progesterone. And it's a capsule, and it can be used orally, and it can be used vaginally, and you can get bioidentical intramuscular progesterone at every pharmacy. So we know progesterone shots are used in pregnancy.
Right.
Sometimes women think that has to come from a compounding pharmacy. I just had a patient yesterday. She had no idea. She had used it in 5 of her pregnancies. She thought it had to be at a compounding pharmacy. I'm like, no, it's available at your CVS and Walgreens.
Interesting.
So
I didn't know that, Teresa.
I didn't either. In my experience, I've only been offered compounding. So
yeah. So that's so important to me, because I think women think, oh, I can't afford compounding, so their bioidentical hormones are not going to be an option for me. There is always an option, I feel like, for everybody. And, the misconceptions around bioidentical are there, again, because doctors will say compounding pharmacies are not legit. No, they are. They're using FDA approved ingredients. It's just not sold from Pfizer or, Merck or whatever drug company is. It's sold from the pharmacy. And we have really quality compounding pharmacies that do an excellent job, and they quality check everything. So I love it. Love compounding pharmacies. I love bioidentical hormones because there's so many options for every woman that's out there.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah. Okay, so our time is coming to a close, but I feel like we could do a whole other, I have so many, oh my gosh, because here's the deal, women. Okay, no matter what your age, as you're listening to this podcast, if you're in your 40s, 50s, beyond, if you're in your 20s, whatever, the time will come where you will reach menopause, and more often than not, but not always, it might not be as ideal. And the beautiful thing is that there is support. But the unfortunate thing is that we don't ever really hear much about that support. It's as though our womanhood only matters when we are fertile, or that when we're in our childbearing years. It's like what our femininity is, we're feminine throughout until the day we die. It's just there's seasons of life, and there's the fertile season of life, but then physically, but then there's still fertile seasons of life after we bear children. We're still maternal, our body is, and our being is maternal. We can care for others. They just might not be our young children. And so I wish that society would acknowledge the femininity of women beyond just their childbearing years. But the good news is that Julie has devoted her professional life to helping women in this age group. And so Julie, we're going to wrap up here, even though there's so much more I feel like we could talk about. I'm going to ask you the question I ask every interviewee. What do you wish every young woman knew about Her Hormone Genius? But then also I want you to be sure that you share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you and some of the offerings that you have that are coming up. So What do you wish every young woman knew about Her Hormone Genius?
I wish every young woman knew that fluctuating hormones are normal, and her body was created. God designed her body perfectly and created it to be good. And that if something is quote unquote amiss, there is pain, there is something, there are answers. There are answers beyond the pill. I wish every young woman knew how God designed her body and how God designed her body to function at its best and what she can do to support that design. And then, to get in touch with me, I have a website, www.juliegrunklee.com. I have several online programs. I work one-on-one with people, coaching. I do speaking. And I have a 6-week online program called Pray, Eat, Move, Transforming You, that is going to be starting right after the first of the year. And so you can check out my website to get more information about that and join us and transform your life. It's not a 1, 2, 3 approach. Here you go, because we know that doesn't work, but it's helping to find things. It's learning about how God designed your body and how he designed it to work well, and then finding ways that work for you to support that design and creating those healthy habits that will help you create health so you can live the happy, active, vibrant life God is calling you to for years to come.
Awesome.
That's
Julie,
great.
thank you so much. Truly, you're very passionate. We can feel that from you, and it's so important. And again, the world just needs more support in this area, and women are crying out for it. And where they're being given a short stick. Here's the pill. But you know what, women, you deserve more than that. And again, if you're working with a physician who just doesn't see that clearly, try to educate them. We were just talking before we started recording, how beautiful it is when physicians and medical providers are open to learning. Your medical provider may not be offering you these solutions because they just don't really honestly know much about it. Or they're very closed off to it. And in that case, I would encourage you to seek outside of the person you're currently seeing. Even like doing interviews with those, Teresa, do people like interview you ever? Like vet doctors, is that a thing?
Yeah. I mean, you can interview any doctor. I mean, sometimes people do like without, doctors will offer like, you can just come in and sit down for 5-10 minutes and do an interview. So that definitely can happen. I know we hear about that with pediatricians a lot. You can interview your pediatrician for your baby, but you can interview any doctor to be, the right fit for you, because it really is a partnership. Yeah. So it really should be something where you have a complete trust in your provider. And so so many times I hear that women, like you said, just don't feel connected to their provider. They go in for their pap smear and their breast exam, and when they talk about anything else, they're not connected to them. Yeah. It's like, I got to go to them because I got to get these things, but on every other level, they don't feel like they're supporting their health. So there's nothing more important than having the right healthcare provider for you. And I always say, and we've talked about it before, this will drive the market in healthcare. Like we have the power to change what providers learn, how they practice. We have the power to change that by insisting that they do a better job to support our health in the way that we want. And this is all about holistic, mind, body, soul, just what Julie has been talking about. Your body is not just a hormone. Your body is not just any one thing. It is holistic, and we have to support all of those things.
Awesome. Amen. Woo, we're on fire. We're on fire. All right, Julie. Well, thanks again for spending this time with us. And to our listeners, please go check out Julie, and you'll find out, again, her website in our show notes. So be sure to check that out. All right. Thanks, ladies.